but I think we're about ready to get started. Wow, there are a lot of people here. Anyway, welcome to the first RSO editing mixing class. I don't know how long it's going to go on. Maybe they'll fire me after today. We'll find out eventually. But anyway, just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm John. I'm an editor here on RSO and am a part of a bunch of other online orchestras. I helped out with the 8-Bit Big Band Lifelight premiere on the audio team for the Virtual Video Game Orchestra. And I also have lots of live mixing and editing experience, both in studios and for concerts. Anyway, let's get started. What's the next slide? So just as we're getting started, I know I sent out a forum, but as a quick reminder, what do you want to get out of this? How much have you done? This is a little bit stolen from another slideshow I did, but have you ever done any professional recording before or been in a studio or anything like that? What do you know? Do you know how to mix? Do you know how to edit? Do you know how to do any of that, or are we starting from the ground up? I promise it'll get more interesting. Yeah, you can drop answers in chat. It doesn't need to be very in-depth, just like I have no clue what I'm doing. You don't need to do the last part, that's only if you want to. Slapping ozone on a mix definitely works. Blenders are cool. So anyway, throughout this class, here are a couple of the goals that I plan on kind of teaching to and like helping people out with. Oh, I can't. No! Okay, that scrolls. Anyway, today we're going to basically just be doing an overview, and I'm going to be answering a bunch of questions, and we might get to mess around with a little bit today. Really, the most important things that you ever need with mixing is here. Setting up sessions. If you set it up well, you can spend more time actually mixing and having fun instead of getting bogged down trying to figure out how to do something because you're like me and set it up poorly, probably. Or Google effectively. That is actually one of the most important things. If you've ever caught me mixing something like in a practice room, you'll see that, oh, how do I do this? I just open up a window of Google and like, how do I do this? And no matter how professional you are, how many sessions you worked on, there's always more to learn, and it's important to know how to Google. Positioning mics effectively. This is something that I'm just going to touch on a little bit because we're not in a professional studio and we don't have as much equipment available to us, and that goes for me and everyone else here. But we might spend a little bit of time in 1 week just learning about that in case you ever do pop into a studio or something like that. Syncing, splicing, and editing. That's going to be the majority of the class. Giving feedback on recordings if you're ever put in the position where someone wants you to submit comments on their recording. That way you know how to do it well and concisely so that you don't hurt their feelings, but you can also still give them effective feedback. Mixing, of course, because mixing's mixing. And we're going to be doing a lot of mixing. Insert RSO blender here. And then, oh yes, naming files. That's very important, Strawberry. And then working on a timeline because, well, sometimes you're put on a timeline and you have to learn how to prioritize different issues over others. Anyway, what's on the next slide? We'll find out. No, okay, there we go. Yeah, we kind of did that. What do you want to learn? You can drop that in chat. And I know I talked, like I said, I'm going to do a little bit of the physicsy stuff today, but I'm going to keep it pretty brief and not go too in-depth because it does get pretty boring pretty quickly unless you're interested in it. So, the first thing I'm going to talk about is like the waveform, which is what you see in most DAWs. Waveform is a visual representation of sound. So basically what sound is air vibrates or it wiggles back and forth. Instead of up and down like it's normally displayed, it's basically a compression or a rarefication of air waves. You don't need to really understand what that means, but if you think about a microphone basically has a very thin metal plate that vibrates when the air hits it, and that's how it picks up sound. And different microphones pick up different resonances and That's how you produce it. Wiggly air, exactly, each. Anyway, next. So if you've worked in Audacity, you've probably seen stuff like this, or any DAW for that matter. White noise. What about the quality of a microphone? I'll come back to that a little bit more later. White noise is basically every single wave combined together. It's slightly more complex than that, but the overall theory is basically that it's a little bit of every sound put together. And it kind of looks something like this. It fluctuates over time. And over here on the right, you can see two different waves, one of which is of a bowed A440, and the other one is of a plucked 440. And because they have a different shape, that means that they have a different overtone or harmonic structure, which we'll talk a little bit about in a bit. Yes, a plucked waveform is decaying, but this is zoomed in so far that you can barely see it. This is maybe, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is roughly 20. So this is roughly 1/800th of a second, if I did the math quickly. Right. EQ. This is something that you're going to be doing a lot of. EQ is something that looks a little bit complicated at first, but it's pretty easy once you wrap your mind around it. Basically, the representation that's shown here is from left to right is your pitch, and in this case, it's measured in hertz. So when you have your A440, that's 440 hertz, which is roughly right around here. Oh, I went the wrong way. 1/22nd of a second. Thank you, J-Dub. And top to bottom is loudness. So if this were flat all the way across, that would be the exact same as the sound coming in. Slides is in my stream, and then I'll have a link for it afterward as well. You can't see my cursor. Okay, that's good to know. But if you see oh, the pointy thingy in Google Slides. I always forget about them. Pointer thingy. Can you see that? Yes, okay, that helps a lot more. So you see this curve along here with all of that. This is basically how we're going to be changing the sound. If it were flat all the way across, that would be the same as the sound coming in. Across the bottom, there are these numbers. These are the frequency of the sound. So right about here is about 440 hertz, which is your tuning A. While you think that you won't be dealing with as much in the very, very high range, because this is about like C8 or C7, C8, really what you have to think about is that if you have sound, there's the fundamental note, which is the note that you're playing on most instruments. But on top of that, what makes each instrument sound different is the combination of frequencies above the fundamental. So if you ever learned about the harmonic series, that's an example of a series of overtones. And different instruments have different combinations of frequencies which make them sound different. I'm talking in circles now. We'll go more into specifics about this later. Really what you have to do is you just have to mess around with it. While scientifically it doesn't make much sense at the moment, we'll be going back and having a lot more fun with it, and I'll give you tracks that you can mess around with EQ as well, so that it can make more sense conceptually. Let's actually do a little bit of that right now. Here I have Reaper pulled up, and what I have right here is a white noise generator, which I'm going to turn down a little bit. That's not the right one. So it doesn't sound very pretty. But if I move this over here, this is a very basic equalizer. And we can see all of the waves, or the sound coming in. It's pretty flat across the board. And that's kind of what white noise. Where can I get a white noise generator plugin for free for FL? I'm not sure. Reaper has one just built in, but what we can do here is if we click Oh, you probably can't see my cursor still. But if you click on one of these bands, you can drag them up and down. And if you drag it from left to right. On the right, it boosts the higher range. And then on the left, you get the lower range. Yes, you generally do want to get rid of white noise, but if it's actual white noise, it's technically impossible, because white noise goes across every single frequency. But there are different types of background noise, like my air conditioner, which hopefully you can't hear too loudly in the background. Yeah, like if you listen to a lot of electronic music, you can hear, like, I'm doing a very bad representation, but like big falls and things like that. So you can raise up a frequency range, and I'll make that a little thinner, and you can drag it around, and you can mess around with this after the class as well. Right now I'm messing around with the EQ to kind of show what it does. And then afterward we'll do this as well. Oh, hey, Nightlark's here. Anyway, we'll mess around with those later a little bit more. Hey, Blue. And I'll kill this so that you don't have to keep listening to it. That's the wrong one. I'm smart. I'm just going to kill that track. So basically throughout the course there are going to be a lot of words that will probably come up a lot, and I'll start building a glossary of all the things that I'm going to be saying. So we have an audio signal, which is basically a digital representation of sound. Basically, when sound comes into your computer, it turns into an electrical pulse, or when it comes into a microphone, when the little metal plate wiggles back and forth when it picks up the sound, it turns into an electronic signal. And I'm not going to go too far down that, but depending on the number of times it wiggles per second, that's the frequency. And then EQ is adjusting the balance between different frequency components, like I was showing before with the boosting the highs versus boosting the mids and things like that. What's up next? We'll find out. The nature of real life sounds. So while I did show you white noise before, and I could also do a sine tone, which is basically a very simple, slightly brain-piercing tone. This only ever works a little bit because we're not in a vacuum. It's never perfect. So what our job is basically to do is to try and make recordings as good as we can get them within reason, because it's not as simple as just removing white noise or things like this. Yeah, I mean, I was just explaining it for people that have a little bit of physics. You don't actually really need to know about that. You don't need to know most of the sciencey things that I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to drop them in for the people that it could potentially help them understand and things like that. And I'm going to be trying to explain everything 2 or 3 different ways, so that whether you're an engineer that's curious or a musician that's curious, or somewhere in between, you'll be able to understand at least the concepts of what I'm talking about, and hopefully I do a good job teaching. And this is just a little quick thing at the end, which you'll hear. There are different types of mics out there in the world. Dynamic mics, which you'll see a lot on stages. I'll just like skim through these. These are just in the slides if you want them to learn about them. Condenser mics are a lot more sensitive. Right now I'm talking into a condenser mic, for instance. The ribbon mics are very nice and very expensive. And I really love ribbon mics, but they're so expensive. Anyway, okay, now the boring part's over. Let's get to have some fun. Well, that was the boring part of it. Does anyone have any questions so far, or anything that I can answer? I'm just going to switch over my mic so I can pull up a session for us to have some fun with. Okay, I'll switch back over my audio for a second. With EQ, do you generally want to boost the fundamental frequency? It really depends. There is never really only one way or one thing to do. Let's see if there is a sine tone generator on here. That's really loud. Ouch. With EQ, okay, back to with EQ, do you generally want to boost the fundamental frequency? It really depends what you're going for, and there's never really one correct answer. Yeah, I cut it off for you guys. You didn't have to deal with that. Basically, boosting the fundamental, it does show that, but the issue is because when you switch notes, the fundamental changes. Like, if you're playing a C and you have the fundamental, let's see, can I show an example of this, for instance? I can. I'll just pull up. So if I pull up, I'll just grab one of the IATR tracks. What should we grab? Let's grab a horn track, because those are pretty easy to tell. And let's go to Spectre. Actually, what we can do is come back to here and then just throw an analyzer. And I'll switch my audio settings so that you can hear this. Okay, cool. So if I start to play this track, what you can see right off the bat here is this kind of shape from this sound. Right here, you can see, right there, that's the fundamental, which is the bass note that's being hit. Followed up by that, you have all of these other spikes, which are the overtones or harmonics. And so as I play this, that's a bad example because that's not zoomed in enough. Yeah. Like that. Okay. So now I've zoomed into a very small range, so you can probably see it. No. And let's jump ahead. So as they play different notes, you can see the peaks kind of moving back and forth. So every time a different note is played, the fundamental shifts. So that makes it very hard to kind of just boost the fundamental. Yeah, that's a horn. Why can we hear auto-tune on voices? That's a very good question. Technically, if you do the auto-tune correctly, you shouldn't be able to hear it. But what you are able to hear is when something just sounds wrong or doesn't sound organic. If it's something that you're not expecting, like you're not expecting someone to do a 2.5 octave jump absolutely perfectly in a 16th note, it'll sound weird. Okay. For boosting versus cutting, technically, in a lot of live sound with analog equipment, cutting is generally better. But because we're in a DAW or an environment that uses what's called floating point processing, whether or not we boost or cut, it doesn't make a significant difference, and there shouldn't be any quality lost. And going back to the fundamental frequency thing, there are ways to do that, but it's pretty hard. So when you mess with EQ, it applies to the whole track, or can you toggle specific sections? You can toggle specific sections. Whether, like in Audacity, I think you can render EQ just to specific tracks. In Reaper, what you can do is basically set what's called automation, which lets you move the different bands of EQ, which, if we pull this back up, which are these like nodes that you can move around. You can say, okay, at 1 minute in, I want this to be here, and then at 2 minutes in, I want it to drift all the way over to here, or 1 minute here, 1 minute 59 here, and then by 2 minutes, in that 1 second, it just jumps to the next spot. That's how you would do that. And yeah, if you go note by note throughout the entire song to do that, that would be really weird. But generally, for EQ, you can make pretty broad strokes to kind of say, okay, I want the upper twinkle of like a violin, or basically from 4,000 hertz above, which is kind of like the frequency of the bow noise. I want that a little bit louder than it came in so that I can make it cut through the mix more, or to kind of give it more punch. Yeah, and there's always, everything that I say comes with a grain of salt, because there are ways that you generally do things, but we're in a weird world where recorders are coming from everywhere, and if something works and if something fixes the issue, then you should do that no matter what the rules say. Can you yes, that's actually a very good idea, J-Dub. So I'm just going to drag this onto the horn. And let's actually move the analyzer to after there too. So I'll just reset that EQ. Oops. I'm crazy. There we go. Let's go to the part where there's actually a little bit more horn. So that's kind of what it sounds like going in. And if we want, we can like boost the middle range. This is in like the 1,000 hertz range, which kind of makes it sound more boxy, I guess you could say. If we lower that down to a lower range. So right now I'm kind of getting it to hover over the fundamental. And that kind of gives it a certain effect. It's harder to kind of show the different ranges on brass because their harmonics are generally very clean sounding. Like if you look at it kind of like just has pretty nice and even spikes. You can't quite tell the difference. Yeah, it's probably hard to tell over Discord, which is one bad thing about this. Let's see. Versus. Is that slightly more obvious 3 pi, or is the Discord compression really murdering it? Yeah. It also tells like yeah, that's actually a good idea. I'll send an MP3 of it really loud in that range. What is it on Reaper? Render? Yeah, so I'll just bounce it really quickly with the boosted. I'm not going to send a wave. Yeah, audio did just die. Now where did I save those? Pro tip, check where you saved your files. Oh, I did save it there. Okay. So EQ can kind of change the timbre of the instrument. But generally that's something that gets very specific, so make sure not to like over constrain it. And another good use for EQ is like if there's a noise in a recording that you want to get rid of, or like if someone has a background noise, or someone has like a high-pitched fan going, what you can do is like move a band around and 60 hertz buzz, for instance, and you can like say, okay, like a good way to do it is to use the bandwidth thing, which is this bottom slider, which adjusts basically the width of the band, as they're called. And if you set that to pretty thin, you can adjust it and move it around and try and just move it back and forth until you find a brain-piercing frequency and say, oh, that sounds really annoying. And then once you find it, you can go down to the gain, which is the middle one, and then basically just invert it to some point. And that helps you pick out frequencies that aren't pleasant to listen to or just sound bad. And you can do that as many times as you want. Yeah, EQ sweeping, exactly. You go back and forth, and then you can say, okay, let's say it's one at 3000 hertz, which is a pretty common range, which is about where like sirens are and things like that. Let's say there's also one at roughly 270 and things like that. And so you can go through and do that sort of thing as well. Wow, these really are taking a long time to upload. Yeah, I should have done that as an MP3. What if the buzz interferes with the actual tone? That's a really, really hard thing to fix, sadly. Yeah, as Tamol says, that usually requires slightly more advanced software, which can get pretty expensive pretty quickly, to kind of kill like random buzzing that interferes with the tone. So here are the two. I rendered the full thing. We were looking at about 56 seconds in, or at about 45 actually. No, I didn't actually record myself. This is another recording from the IITR project. And so one of them is pretty heavily boosted. The day 1-001 is the original, and the day 1 is the one. It sounds a little bit like you're in a tin can. And as you do more and more of it, you can start to pick out the frequencies and start to pick out the finer details. And then there are also like different types of EQ plugins. This is the one that I have open right now because it's the one that's built into Reaper. But you can also, there are also other ones. Let's see if I can find a few that look a little different. So I have a bunch of them. Something like this. These kind of just look a little different. Some don't have the analyzers. And you could set different types of curves, which we'll get into later. Oh, I guess I should touch on that in this one as well. So some of these, like, they look like, I don't know what to describe them. Like they look like a lump. If you have the typed thing, there's a drop-down menu here that lets you choose different options. So like a low shelf basically makes it look like this, where you can boost all of the frequencies below it. A high shelf does the opposite, and they're all different sorts of things as well that you can choose from. And really, as much as I can try and teach you, the best way to do it is to just go and mess around with it yourself, whether or not you just drop in a single instrument, or go and download a rip of your favorite song and then just messing around with it and trying to boost and edit different things and see what it does. That's really one of the best ways to learn how to use EQ. And I might give out a little tiny homework assignment where you just mess around with EQ. Can you explain the different types of EQs and what they're good for? Okay, yeah, so right now I have the default re-EQ, which is Reapers, and then I have this one, which I don't actually like and I don't normally use. So I'm going to pull up one that I do normally use. Basically, when you're starting off, all the EQs are roughly the same. The differences between them is, on a basic level, how they're programmed. So I think both of these are programmed in a similar way. I don't want to get too into the weeds of how probably their Fourier transforms differ and how they use different like inverses to notch out different frequencies using a whole host of things that I don't understand. So many buttons. Yeah. And also another thing, like if you look at live soundboards or even here, these are all duplicates of the same thing. So over here, if you switch between selecting two different points, it shows basically the frequency, gain, and bandwidth of those. And here, these are all just laid out side by side. Yes, Fourier transforms. My favorite and most hated topic. And so here, you can see like if I adjust one of these bands, you can see that the first thing is changing. And for some reason, this is always very sensitive. But as you get into more specialized EQ plugins, they're coded differently to mimic real-life equalizers as well. And so they might be programmed in a less optimal way or just a different way so that it can give the overall sound a different color. Or like if you boost a sound in one plugin, it might slightly distort it, which is called saturation, to give it a slightly thicker sound or a wider sound. Not really wider, but slightly harsher. So should you EQ the frequencies yourself or use the presets? I'd say use a combination of both. Presets are a great place to start, and they generally get you in the ballpark. And the people who usually build the presets are a lot smarter than you or me. But we're not in a perfect environment, and we're not recording in a perfect environment. So there's always going to be a bit of tweaking involved. So you can start off with a preset. I don't think Audacity has presets. But, like for instance, if I go up to the top of here in Reaper, it says list Q10 full reset. There are a bunch of different EQ presets that I can start off with. So if I want, I can do a telephone one, and I'll actually drag this onto my voice so that you can hear it. Like that. And now it kind of sounds like I'm talking through a telephone. Or I can do a 11 hertz brick wall, which kind of has the same effect. Oh, no, it doesn't, because I'm not on the right one. And if I go over here and turn on where is it, 11 kilohertz brick wall. Like that, it kind of sounds like the top end is still chopped off. And, I mean, these are some of the most drastic presets that are on there. But, yeah, back to normal now. These are the most drastic presets, but there are a lot subtler presets for different strings and things like that. Let's see if the default one... Yeah, so like, for instance, in the default EQ, you have like wide male vocal, or different ones for mud-free, basic 11 band Fender or Mesa for like a guitar amp, or notch at 50 hertz, or electro drum smooth. And there are also presets that you can download online. Let's see. And then I guess I kind of jumped over a little bit at the start for what are plugins, for instance. I guess I should start off with that. Plugins are basically different ways to process the sound, so to achieve different effects. So, for instance, EQ is a type, in this case, of plugin that you basically add to a channel or to a track that lets you manipulate the sound in some way. And there are all sorts of different presets and all sorts of different things. Like if I wanted to, I could go to here and like this. And now, apparently I sound like I'm in San Francisco Hall. I gotta turn it off. So there are all sorts of different cool things that you can do with plugins and different sorts of presets. Yeah, every time I submit for a project, I'm just going to drown myself in reverb. And if you spend a lot of time hunting through the internet, you can find all different types of plugins and you can even build them yourself. Wait, they have a generator folder? That would have been helpful to find. And so Reaper helps break it down into categories for you, which are very helpful. You might not see all of the categories that I have here. And it breaks them up into like different distortions and things built for drums, dynamics, which include compressors and things like that. Compressors are a lot more diverse than EQ starting out. They have a wider range because here, like, I think these are the two that come with Reaper, but yeah, I have a bunch of compressors. I think GarageBand has some EQ stuff as well. I'm not as familiar. Are effects and EQ the same / similar things? Yes. EQ and anything else kind of falls under that effect category. Whether or not, like you want to call it, that it's all sort of a plugin, an effect, something in the signal chain. What is EQ again? EQ is equalization, or basically letting you change, like, or make the highs louder but make the low end softer, or different things like that. What does compression actually do, and what do the ratios mean? That is a very complicated question. What compression does, here, where is, I'll try and find a good example. Where it is, let's go to VST, go to VST3 because we want that, and neutron. Generally, for a lot of like the more classical projects, you want to use compression sparingly because it can murder the dynamic range, but at the same time, yeah, infinite ratio basically means as soon as it hits the threshold, it basically hits a brick wall, which is why infinite ratio compressors or limiters are also called brick wall compressors or brick wall limiters. Why you would compress in classical music is because, especially in online things, when the compression on something ends, it effectively makes the tail end sound a little louder, which can help basically pull the mix together and give the effect of reverb without actually adding any reverb and without it becoming too muddy, which is very helpful, especially for really dry online projects that you don't want to drown in reverb. And like if you ever listen to, like if you've ever recorded a live rock concert on your phone or yourself playing your instrument on a camera, you might actually be able to hear the compression. They use a slightly different style of compression that has what is called a really long release. So it, like, you might hear it like normal talking, but as soon as the concert starts, everything else gets really, really quiet. And what that does is it effectively adjusted the gain through compression. There was also a question earlier about gain versus faders. That's a little weird to explain, but basically in Audacity it shouldn't make much of a difference, but it makes a little bit more of a difference here. Gain is basically the amplitude of the track coming in. So if you raise the gain, that's the volume of the track before it hits any of the effects that you put on it. So before EQ and before anything like that. But the volume, which we can see here, is the last thing on the track. It's the right before it hits whatever sends or outputs it goes to. So if we adjust the volume, that doesn't impact the EQ in any way. So I can turn myself up like that, or I can turn myself down and I have to get closer to the mic. But yeah. Oh, we're kind of running out of time now. If are there any other questions? Okay. Yeah, and that's why recording with iPhone mic and built-in mics kind of get a little weird with things like voice memos, especially. If you record into a DAW, though, like even Audacity or whether it be Reaper or something else, that generally bypasses most of the processing, so it won't automatically compress it. But because it doesn't automatically compress it, then you also have to be careful that you don't peak or distort the microphone coming in. Will we get into the very basics of Reaper in another class? We can start going over that now, I guess, because the homework might involve a little bit of using Reaper. I will send around a short video later that is like 10 minutes and helps get everything set up and started. Snowball is a condenser microphone, and it's actually a really good microphone for the money. I think that's also what Kestrel uses. Okay, I have plenty of plugins for adding reverb, but what if you want to reduce reverb/room noise? Nightlark has a good post over in Comp and Edit a bit ago with reducing background noise in Reaper. JDub can help you a lot with doing it in Audacity. I'm pretty sure that's something I'm less familiar with. I have a plugin called, removing reverb is very hard, but room noise itself, it's possible. I use Isotope RX, which is mind-blowing software that helps you get rid of background noise and can sometimes get rid of reverb, but at least to me, getting rid of the reverb kind of sounds like it's choking the sound a little bit and cutting off the tail end a bit too much. What if there is actually reverb in the room? That's kind of hard. That's really hard to get rid of. And also something that's really important to remember is that it's best to get the most optimal recording possible to begin with. So if you have the opportunity to re-record it in a room with less reverb, if you want that, then it's going to sound a lot better and save you a lot of pain just doing that than trying and spending hours trying to remove the sound. Also, what Nightlark said, the closer the mic is to you, the more it will pick you up and the less it'll pick the room up. Or even recording outside is great if it's quiet and there aren't birds or anything. But you have to be careful because birds are loud. And also if it's windy. But if it's perfectly still, you're out in the middle of the desert with no birds and no wind, then that's a really great place to record. Okay. So I have noticed that the low instruments are a lot fainter than the trumpet/clarinet. That could be due to a lot of things, but less pointed. That could be because of compression. The mic might start at a certain sensitivity, and when they start playing, the mic might overcompensate compression-wise, and then it will start to back off a little bit. So it'll basically compress out the harsher transients. And the other thing is headphones. A lot of headphones have a lot weaker low end, so it sounds as if they aren't as loud. To fix that, what you can do is to add a compressor with a slow attack time, which will basically let the attack stay at its loudest, but then make everything else after that a little bit quieter, which is a good way to work around that. Or to add what's called a transient designer. Headphone choice makes a huge difference when mixing. Do that to the euphonium. And what I like to do generally when I'm mixing is to try it on my normal pair of headphones, which I'm wearing right now, a separate pair of headphones, like Apple earbuds, on my computer, my laptop speakers, in a car if possible, and that covers most of the different frequency ranges, and make sure. And if you can get to sound on good on all of those, good job. That's really hard, but once you can do it, it's so fulfilling. How can I choose what headphones my audience wears? That's actually really important. So if you go to a lot of recording studios, they have a pair of monitors called the Yamaha NS10s, which were basically made to mimic the speakers that everyone has, like for their home stereos back in the day. And so that was very common. So they'd have really nice like Genelex or Trinity speakers or things like that. But then they'd also have the Yamaha NS10s, which is a little bit of a history lesson. But yeah, it's important to kind of like even go out to a local convenience store and pick up a pair of $2 headphones. And if you can get your mix to sound good across all of those, then you've really worked wonders. And yeah. And it is also good to remember that, yeah, in cars as well, definitely. Cars often like have a very boomy low end. But yeah, and send the mixes to your friends, send it to your family, and see what they think. See if like anything pokes out to them. Because even if they're not musicians, they still have ears, and they might not be able to articulate exactly what they're thinking. People generally do kind of, or can kind of tell what is good and what is not. So are there any questions that I missed? Or is there anything else that anyone's curious about? Oh, and don't worry, I recorded the entire class and I will be uploading it probably later today, if not early tomorrow. I may also drop just like a little anonymous Google form in here in a bit for any comments on how I did and how I can improve, because as most of you probably know, I'm not really a teacher, and yeah, I'll post homework soon. It's not going to be very much homework. I'm not going to make you write. Ariana's last couple of questions. How long does it take for you to equalize a recording? It really depends. If it sounds good coming in, I won't touch it. Like we were talking about over on the PPP server last night. Like the oboes sounded good. What did I do to them? I did nothing to them. And do you correct for pitch or tempo? That also depends on really on the recordings coming in. It could be anywhere from 2 minutes to a couple of hours. And I mean, I also hold myself to a little bit too high of a standard, but it really depends. You should keep on working until you're happy with it, in my opinion. And whether that you can knock out a mix in 2 hours or you can knock it out in 2 weeks. And it really comes down to you as a person, and you should keep on going until you're happy. And if you aren't happy, you can always reach out to me, reach out to others, see if they have any tips or advice to try and help you get to where you're going to be happy. Thank you all for coming to the class. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm always around if you have questions, and my DMs are always open. I'm always in Comp and Edit, all of that sort of thing. And I hope I don't get fired by 2 weeks from now. But yeah. And it's also good to just practice mixing as much as you can. There was a website with a bunch of like different recording sessions. Most of them aren't classical, but mixing as much as you can and trying to fix or figure out as much as you can is the best way to get better. And it's just throw yourself in. As long as you're doing something and messing around, you'll learn. And that's really the best way to get better. I'll try and hunt for some resources to help you guys with a bunch of multi-tracks and things like that. Okay. So are there any other questions? Let me try and find the bell. Can I make a bell? Class dismissed. Thank you, J-Dub.